All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're prying open the toolbox that leaders, finance ministers, and central bankers use to try and steer a national economy. And believe me, it is one complex machine. Managing it takes a very specific and very powerful set of instruments.
So, that's the big question, right? How on earth do you manage the insane complexity of a modern economy? How do policymakers navigate these turbulent waters of inflation, growth, and global trade without crashing the whole ship? Well, the answer isn't one single thing, but it really boils down to understanding four fundamental levers of control.
So here's what we're going to cover. We'll start by walking the taxation tightrope. It's a real balancing act. Then we'll dive into an incredible story, the battle to tame hyperinflation in Brazil. From there, we'll look at something called the quantity theory of money, which is all about the money supply. And we'll wrap up with a fascinating economic puzzle known as the impossible trinity.
Okay, first up, taxation. Now, we all think of taxes as just a way for the government to collect money, but it's so much more than that. When it's used cleverly, it's less of a sledgehammer and more of an economic scalpel. It can subtly influence our behavior and shape the entire economy. And the key to that kind of precision? It all comes down to a concept called elasticity.
So, what is price elasticity of demand? It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually super simple. It just measures how much we change our buying habits when the price of something changes. You know, if the price of coffee doubles, do you buy a little less or you stop buying it altogether? That's elasticity. The formula just puts a number on that reaction. And this is where it gets really interesting for policymakers. Because when they put a tax on something, say a sugary drink, they usually have one of two goals in mind. Goal number one, make a ton of money for the government. Goal number two, get people to drink less sugary stuff for public health reasons. The tricky part, you can't really do both perfectly at the same time. This quote just nails it. It basically says there's a fundamental trade-off between the two objectives. The more you succeed at one, the more you kind of have to fail at the other. If you make a ton of money from a soda tax, it means people are still buying a lot of soda, right? So the health goal isn't working as well. It's a classic catch-22. So this is how they navigate that trade-off. It all depends on whether the demand for a product is inelastic or elastic. If demand is inelastic, think gasoline or cigarettes, people are going to keep buying it even if the price goes up. That's perfect for raising revenue. But if demand is elastic, maybe like a specific brand of fancy chocolate, a small price hike makes people switch to something else. That's a powerful tool for changing behavior, even if you don't collect much tax money. And just real quick, what's happening under the hood here? Well, it's basically two things we all do instinctively. First is the substitution effect. Your favorite soda gets more expensive, so you just switch to a cheaper one or to water. Simple. The other is the income effect. When prices go up, your money doesn't go as far. You feel a little poorer, so you might cut back on certain things. Together, these two effects drive elasticity. Now let's shift from that precise scalpel of taxation to what is basically economic emergency surgery. We're talking about one of the scariest things an economy can face, hyperinflation. And there's no better case study for this than Brazil in the 1980s and 90s. I mean, you have to understand, for decades, Brazil was just trapped in this nightmare cycle of chronic inflation. We're talking about prices spiraling so fast that your life savings could be wiped out in months. It was completely destabilizing the country, and everyone knew something drastic had to be done. So they tried a couple of really big plans. First, in 1986, was the Plano Cruzado. This was a real shock and awe approach. They just froze all prices and wages overnight. It worked, for a little while, but then it all fell apart. Then 8 years later came the Plano Real. This was a totally different beast, much more gradual, focused on the fundamentals, and it had a secret weapon. And this was the absolute game changer. The secret weapon was the URV, the unit of real value. Now, this wasn't actual money you could hold. It was a stable reference point, kind of like a virtual dollar. For months, everything in the economy, prices, contracts, salaries, was quoted in URVs. This let everyone's brain break the cycle of inflation before the new currency was even launched. It was a genius move that laid the foundation for lasting success. That whole saga in Brazil is the perfect lead-in to our third tool, which gets to the very core of what causes inflation in the first place. Think of this one as the main faucet controlling the flow of money into the economy. It's called the quantity theory of money. Now, this theory gets summed up in one famous little equation. M times V equals P times Y. Don't worry, it's not as scary as it looks. M is just the total amount of money in the economy.
V is how fast that money changes hands. P is the overall price level, and Y is the actual stuff the economy produces, goods and services. This equation is always true, by definition, but it becomes a powerful theory when we make a couple of key assumptions.
So, in the long run, the theory assumes two things are basically stable. First, V, the velocity of money. It doesn't change much because it's based on things like banking habits and technology, which moves slowly. Second, Y, the real output. That's determined by real things, like how many factories and workers you have. Okay, so if V and Y are basically fixed, what does that do to our equation? Well, it means that the only things left that can really move are M, the money supply, and P, the price level. And that leads to a really powerful prediction. Over the long run, if you increase the money supply, the only thing that's really going to happen is that prices will go up. The growth of money determines the rate of inflation. And this brings us to a huge concept in economics, money neutrality. It's a fancy way of saying that in the long run, printing more money doesn't create more real wealth. It can't create more jobs or build more factories. All it does is change the nominal stuff, like prices. It's a fundamental lesson for any government. You simply cannot print your way to prosperity. All right, this brings us to our final tool. And this one is less of a single tool and more of a constant, high-stakes juggling act that every country faces in a globalized world. It's known as the impossible trinity. It's called the impossible trinity because a country can have any two of these three things, but it is impossible to have all three at the same time. The choices are a stable, fixed exchange rate, free movement of money in and out of your country, and an independent monetary policy to manage your own economy. You get to pick two. That's it. Let's walk through the choices. Option 1, you prioritize stability. You lock in your exchange rate and you let capital flow freely. This is great for predictability and attracting foreign investors. But what do you give up? Control over your own monetary policy. Your central bank can't just cut interest rates to fight a recession if it risks breaking that currency peg. You've essentially handed over the keys. Okay, what about option 2? You want both a stable currency and control over your domestic economy. You can do that. You can fix your exchange rate and set your own interest rates. But the price you pay is a big one. You have to give up the free flow of capital. You have to build walls to stop money from moving freely across your borders, which can be pretty restrictive. And that leaves us with option 3, the path that most major economies like the US have chosen. You choose free capital flows and you keep control over your own monetary policy. You get the best of both worlds, right? Well, the trade-off is that you have to completely give up on having a fixed exchange rate. You have to accept that your currency will float, its value going up and down every single day on the global market. So there you have it, the Policymaker's Toolkit. But the really crucial thing to remember is that these tools don't work in isolation. They are all interconnected. A choice you make about your money supply is completely constrained by the impossible trinity. A decision on taxes can affect everything. It is a constant, incredibly delicate balancing act. And that leaves us with one final, really big question to think about. In the world we live in now, with the rise of cryptocurrencies, with massive global supply shocks like we've seen recently, and with all the new economic challenges on the horizon, we have to ask ourselves, is this classic 20th century toolkit still going to be enough to handle the problems of the 21st?